Okay, let's talk about different colors of light. And maybe a quick aside about how this might be the most beautiful, prettiest title that I've written so far. So when it comes to the colors of light, in particular those affecting plant growth, we've got, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plus different categories. So first we have far red, then we have red, green, blue, and then this combo category of ultraviolet, which itself can be divided down into UVA, UVB, and UVC. Now, how all these different colors affect plants, it could be an entire course, several courses, and no one wants to watch one of my videos for, 10 weeks. So instead, I'm just gonna cover a couple things for each of these types of light, just to really drive home this point of you can't just throw one light color on top of plants, or even two colors, typically the most common being red and blue. But let's get into that. Why red and blue being the most common? Well, they're both the primary drivers of photosynthesis. The energy involved in these photons is what supplies most of the energy to plants that they capture in their chloroplasts. However, just like the evolution of our understanding of plant nutrition and how that has evolved beyond NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, we're still pushing this realm of light. The study of how these different wavelengths affect plants is really fascinating right now. We are on the absolute cutting edge of plant development when it comes to mixing and giving particular light recipes or light mixtures for particular styles of plant production. There's even this effort to steer plant growth depending on what wavelengths you give it. One of the things that we can see with this is exemplified by far red light, or really day length, and this is what plants use to more or less tell the season. It leads to flowering in long day plants, in plants that flower when there are long days, and it inhibits flowering in plants that are short day crop. There's many other things that are happening, and this flowering can really be a stand-in for a number of physiological factors. But again, really, I guess we're calling this far red helps a plant know where it's at in the year, the season. And so it really does depend on what kind of plant you're growing, but basically you can make it do certain things by telling it it's in a certain season, regardless of your natural light, whatever the sun's giving it or not. You give it a bunch of far red or you don't give it far red, the plant's going to react depending on where in the year it thinks it is, how much sun it thinks is ahead of it. It's trying to prepare. When we're getting a lot of far red in these short day plants, they're not going to flower because in their mind it's not time, and so they're putting their energy into other parts of their crop growth, often either root development, or maybe they're just not going to do any more flowering and then just pushing to ripen whatever seeds and fruit they might already have. So again, very highly crop plant species dependent, but far red is a significant indicator of season. One of the simpler aspects of red light is that it can give a red color to plants. So it can increase anthocyanin and also phenols in plants. Now again, it's crop dependent, right? In the study that I would be citing here, it increases the anthocyanin in red cabbage. It increased the phenols in lettuce. But what are both of these things? Anthocyanin and phenols are both human health benefits. They're nutrients that the plant's putting into itself, but that we want from that plant. So we can either increase the color of it to make it more marketable because it looks more pretty, and also just generally giving it more red light can induce a more nutritious crop. When we get to green light, we can see increased nitrite and nitrate reductase, which is really just protein enzymes in the plant that lead to protein synthesis. We've also seen many accounts of green light increasing photosynthetic rate. So despite what you might have heard, especially earlier in school, about how plants are green because they don't absorb green light, and so they're reflecting that green light, and so plants don't need green light, we're not finding that to really be the case anymore. I mean, they surely do reflect green light. That's why they are green. Like that point still stands, half of it at least. However, mounting evidence shows that green light can tremendously increase crop production. This protein synthesis, which crops need to grow, the photosynthesis, so just simply giving it green light increases the plant's use of all the other lights as well. Blue light, we're back to, a primary driver. Green light supplementing this photosynthesis, but now that we're at blue light, we see that it can control stomata opening, which is just the respiration of the plant, and so in an indirect way, it's nutrient uptake, because as the stomata open, the plant respires and moves water through its body, pulling it up from the roots and pushing it out to the rest of the plant. We also see it is one of the primary things which controls elongation of the plant. So if you've ever put a plant all the way down here, if you've ever put a plant somewhere too shady for it and it starts getting leggy or it starts reaching, or you've got a really long internode length, let's see. So, if you've got a plant like this and it has one leaf here, and then it grows for a while before it puts out this second leaf, each of these points are a node, and thus we have our internode length here. That plant is looking for stronger light, and its main signal of stronger light is blue light. So if you can give it a bunch of blue light, obviously you need the rest of this light in balance for what the plant needs for it to grow well. But if you can give it this blue light, it will prevent this etiolation, and if everything else is good, suddenly you dump blue light on it, and it's gonna put out another leaf here, and put out another leaf here, and then put out another leaf here. And now your internode length is dramatically reduced. We've got node, node, node. Your internode length is dramatically reduced. The crop is much more compact. It's spending more energy on just growing. It's putting out these solar panels. It's not getting all leggy. Generally, it's much more marketable. And even if that's not the case, it tends to grow faster because, again, it's just not wasting energy producing stem. Stem is just like the highway. Stem is just the transport for everything else that's going on. Our crop is almost always, not always, but almost always either the leaf or even, the roots down here, or the flower bud, or even, the fruit. Regardless, except for in rare cases, we're not really seeking this stem. And also, even if we were seeking this stem, these stems become thin, they become brittle, and you can sometimes even get a crop that just snaps in half because this internode length got too long, it tried too hard, and it was just too weak because it didn't have enough blue light. It was getting so etiolated that it just, it failed because it didn't have enough light. All right, here we are to ultraviolet light. For you and I, ultraviolet light is, damaging, right? It can cause cancer, it causes various cell deaths and DNA mutation. Ultraviolet light is very high power light and damages crops as well. But at the right level, ultraviolet light can actually do some great things for our crops. It can lead to increased levels of secondary metabolite production. Now, secondary metabolites are anything that the crop doesn't actually need to grow, but generally secondary metabolites are what we, the consumers, are looking for. So where'd it go? Up here in red light, anthocyanin and phenols, we want those. They are secondary metabolites. There's a bunch of other secondary metabolites, in particular with a lot of various medicinal crops and like essential oils and stuff. These secondary metabolites are responding to this ultraviolet light, this highly intense light, this sometimes damaging light, by producing what is for them essentially sunscreen. So this can be things like oils and resins. All of this is highly species dependent, it can be, ultraviolet light can be inhibitory, it can be stimulating, highly species dependent. But depending on what you're growing, ultraviolet light can work wonders for increasing the nutrient content, increasing the content in the crops that we are seeking. Rather than just growing the plant, we're actually growing the plant with more of what we actually want from that plant. So for example, if you're trying to make peppermint oil and you give it just the right amount of ultraviolet light, it actually grows with more oil per, more oil per leaf, or however you want to measure it, so that rather than just getting a bulk of leaves that you're pressing down into this little drop of oil, you now get the same bulk of leaves, but you're getting maybe 5 times as much oil out of it. So obviously very significant for crop production. UVA is the weakest of the 3 kinds of ultraviolet light here, and plants generally use this as another measure of incoming light. So similar to far red light, we're now having, ultraviolet, kind of like far blue light, another measure of incoming light. Plants are using this not necessarily as their energy source, their primary driver of photosynthesis like red and blue, but instead they're using it to just gauge, they're using it to respond. Just like here they're trying to figure out what season they're in, here they're trying to figure out almost their elevation, like how strong is the light. And they'll respond by doing things like can increase their cuticle, which could be desired or not depending on the crop. Generally not quite so desired because it makes the crop tougher. It can increase their trichomes, which is kind of circling back around to secondary metabolites sometimes depending on the crop. Also, generally it's just another way that the crops can protect themselves. So a lot of insect pests don't like plants with a high level of trichomes. So if you look on a tomato plant, all those hairs, those are actually trichomes. And those hairs prevent, not directly prevent, directly prevent, they're a physical guard against plants. Like you and I just see the hairs, you can just rub the side of the stem and just knock them off. It doesn't matter to us because we're so big. But when it comes down to like a pest, an insect, they typically avoid these because they can't really manage them. It makes it uncomfortable to impossible to land on the crop. UVB is where we really start to see phenotypic responses. So not just species dependent, but phenotype dependent. So what this means is that if you took 2 seeds, identical, or 2 clones, let's do that, 2 clones of a plant, identical, and you put them in 2 different areas and they receive different levels of UVB, we're now going to start to see divergence in their growth, where one's going to grow into one phenotype where the other grows into a different phenotype. They're still genetically identical, but there's different gene response. Because again, the plants are using this to measure where they're at, they're responding to their environment. The plants can't move, they are sessile, they are rooted in one spot, but they still respond to their environment. They're using the incoming cues to grow into different forms of themselves, to fulfill different parts of their potential, to really try to seek the most successful life that they can. And then lastly, we'll hit here with UVC. UVC is the most powerful of the ultraviolets that we're listing here. There's no current benefits found. UVC is like the epitome of ultraviolet light. It is the strongest of the strong wavelengths. Right now, UVC is generally just damaging. However, back around to how I started this, we are at the edge, the very cutting edge of research and development in crop production. We'll probably find some uses for UVC. Even if it is just damaging, the plant is likely going to respond to that damage in a certain way. And so it might not be a direct benefit, but we're likely going to find some indirect downstream factors and results from UVC exposure to plants. So all right, no pictures this time, but different colors. And honestly, this is just, I find this really intriguing, so I hope you do too. the colors of light, this is why it's important to give your plant at least a balanced whole spectrum, complete spectrum. Full sunlight is great, but you can start drilling down and manipulating and changing how the crop is going to respond depending on which of these you lean into or pull back from that crop.